everybody.
We're back. The grand triumphant return of, well, not really. You've been back for a little bit. We are back.
Yeah.
Because you've been busy. I was gonna say you've the last couple episodes have been your interviews, which of course you teed up the I guess the series that we are starting. Before we get into it, welcome to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. My name is David. My friend is Aaron. Good day, sir. Good evening, I suppose.
Yes.
And to those of you
feels
listening,
like it's 2 a.m. here, but it's only just after 9.
Yeah. To those of you listening on your morning commute, I suppose good morning as well, or good afternoon, whatever. What was that saying from the Truman Show?
The Truman Show. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. And if I don't see you, something. Or
Yeah.
good afternoon.
It was like good morning, good afternoon. If I don't see you, good night. Yeah. We're really good at remembering these things. It's been forever since I've seen that show. Really.
Instead of our movie quote at the beginning, we're just gonna like misquote movies instead.
Yeah. I won't actually use a movie quote. I'll just use us butchering. I like it. Speaking of it, so if you noticed the last couple of episodes, and I mean, if this is your first time tuning in, well, you wouldn't have noticed anything. But the last couple of episodes sounded a little bit different. But that's because we had our buddy Jed from Talking Records. He stepped up to edit some episodes for us because I was just feeling lazy. I was like, I should get around to doing this, but I ate too much stuffing and pie at Christmas, and it was just like, just wanted to forever be in my Christmas food coma. And no, so he helped us get those episodes out, got rolling again. And as you mentioned, Aaron, in those episodes, we're starting a new series that's going to probably go for a little bit here. We're almost kind of
take us to 2023.
Yeah, we're kind of making it up as we go along too, but we're covering different labels, record labels that just played a big role, a big influence on us in the music that we listened to growing up. So of course you started with the 2 Solid State episodes, and that's kind of an interesting way to start because the plan here is to do an episode like this where it is myself and Aaron. We're going to do this. We're going to share our records, and then following it up with the next episode being an interview with an artist who was on the label at some point in time. Don't have to be necessarily on the label now, but they were on at some point in time sharing their top releases from said label. So so this time we're going to do Victory Records. That's what we're going to jump into. I have no idea how we plan on doing this, like what order we're going to do these in. Just kind of, I guess, as we see fit. We have a lot of the interviews kind of at least roughly lined up. So
yeah, and it's basically who's available, and then it's not necessarily like super planned out, but planned out in the sense of we have an idea of what labels we'll be doing, and a good handful of people confirmed for that. And so and it's kind of I don't know, it's starting a new year, it's nice to have a plan, but it's also nice to not have so much of a plan that you have to stick super to it. And so I think as we've gone back and forth the last month or so, it's realizing lives are busy, and the podcast should be for fun, and we don't need to get stressed out about it. And so
because
it's kind of nice.
I'll say in reality, from since the last time we recorded, I went back to work. So that plays a pretty big role, and all of a sudden going like, oh man, I thought I had all this time, and now it's just so things may look or sound a little different as we go forward, but we're going to try and keep it as I don't know how to word this, but as straightforward, as normal as possible, I guess. So we'll see.
Nice thing
you do you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's nice to there's just like a little bit of a lag, so if I'm cutting you off, then I apologize for that. I've just been thinking, even just on my bike ride today, I don't know why it popped into my mind, but it's easy with something like this, you want to make it professional and take lots of time to prep and be ready, and which is great. I mean, that definitely makes a podcast even better. But at the same time, what I like about this is it's having conversations. I don't prep when I'm having a conversation with a friend or something, right? It's just So sometimes if it seems like we're not prepped or we don't know what we're talking about, it's maybe just because we've been busy, or I'm not trying to make an excuse, but just
I think
you
most
know
of the time we don't know what we're talking about.
going against those comments. That's like yeah. Anyways, this is just for fun, people.
Yeah.
We get paid 1 cent per episode, so
I want, yeah, sure. I don't know who's paying you, but I want to get in on this deal. Who's paying you, man?
that's just the interest. That's the interest I'm making from my savings in the hour that we're doing this.
See, you're getting paid per episode by not, I mean, not like you could really go out with buddies right now anyway, but instead of going out and spending money, you're
Yeah.
sitting at home in your basement talking about music. So, um, yeah, let's, oh, I was going to say real quick too, there may be some labels that possibly get covered that it's just the interview with the artist. Who knows, because they may have been on a label that didn't necessarily strike a major chord with either of us outside of 1 or 2 releases, but still worth mentioning. And so we'll see where it goes. Like I said,
Yeah.
we're kind of making it up as we go along, so we're going to get into Victory Records. Before we get into, we're going to do like our top 5 releases. And I think you said this in one of the Solid State episodes, we're not like trying to create some definitive list here that's like, these are the top 5 records or top 10, because we're going to share 10 in total. But, from such and such a label, it's just the ones that hit us. The only real rule that I think we have is just one release per artist. We could come across the label where you could fill a top 5 with one band, and that's just not, that kind of takes some of the fun away. So when you say like, not prepping for conversations with friends, there is a little bit, we have constructed our lists with one rule in there, but I did want to mention before we dive into our respective top 5s is that we both had a band that we were tossing around to potentially, one of their releases making our top 5. And then it's just funny because both of us like different albums from this band. And in the end, they didn't make our top 5, but we did want to give a quick mention because it was the only band that kind of made both of our short lists, which is funny and random. But the band, The Audition, I'm a big fan of their album Champion, and I think you like one of their other ones, right?
I actually I like all their albums. Champion's kind of my least favorite, but their self-titled album is my favorite of theirs. I really like their first one. I'm blanking on what it's called, and then the one after self-titled, Great Danger, was also really good. They were one of those bands kind of in that, I don't know what you call it style-wise, pop rock, power pop, pop punk, kind of, that kind of blew up there. I don't know, maybe like mid 2000s or whatever. Tooth and Nail had a lot of those bands. Victory was signing a lot of those, and The Audition was always just one that kind of stood out, at least from the ones that were on Victory. They had a handful of good ones, but for some reason I really like The Audition and kind of what they brought to the table.
Yeah, they were a band that I say they kind of like fit in the realm of like the Fall Out Boy kind of pop punk emo sort of thing of the time.
Yeah.
Except Champion is the only album of theirs that I really got into, and it's funny because I bought it. My wife and I, we were down in Montana, Missoula, Montana. I think we were down there for a concert. We went and saw. Did you ever see the movie Once?
I'm familiar with it. My wife liked it, but
yeah, so
I
it like won, I think, an Academy Award for Best Original Song. But anyway, the two kind of main actors in that movie actually formed a band out of it called the Swell Season, and we went down to see them. And I'm pretty sure that's when I bought this. We were just in like a skate shop sort of clothing shop thing, and there was at the front counter was the CD, and I was like, oh, that looks interesting. Yeah, I'll buy it. And so we listened to it a ton because we drove down there. And so just driving around and whatever. And it's a one that occasionally, like one of the songs will just pop into my head, just like one of the melodies. I'm like, oh, yeah, I should listen to, or my wife will randomly ask for it. She'll be like, what's that one band? And then she'll like kind of like sing a line or be like, something to do with Montana. I can't remember if we saw them or, and then I'll be like, oh, yeah, and put it on. So it's kind of one of those random bands that I think both her and I listen to on occasion, not a ton anymore. That was quite some time ago, but every now and then that one comes back up and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to put that on. It's catchy, it's hooky. It's all the
Yeah.
good things. So
Yeah, super good melodies, and yeah, great vocalist in that band. That
yeah,
was always kind of the standout for me with them.
for sure. Let's get into our top fives. In the past, I know when we've done kind of these sort of things, like when we pick our, 5 albums of the year, we kind of do them out of order and try and guess each other's list. We're just going to go through our top five each in our order. We'll go back and forth, so you can share your number five first, and yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, kind of as you alluded to before, with not saying these are the top albums. There's labels like like Solid State, like Victory, that have been around for 20 plus years. You could pick a top five, metal or hardcore or
Yeah.
screamo or emo or whatever. And so it was, as I was going through their discography, it was like, oh, like this one. Then there's so many. At least for me with Victory, it was like, oh yeah, I remember this band from a sampler, or I saw them live, and so I was trying to pick kind of like which ones did I listen to the most, which ones that I kind of keep coming back to, because there's lots on there that's are really influential and cool albums. But so I tried to kind of pick even now which ones I would still go back and listen to on a somewhat regular basis.
And before you get into your list, I think I pointed this out as like we kind of really like picked the two sides of Victory. Like when I think of Victory records, I think of, I mean, I guess, like there are some of mine that don't necessarily, like they branch out a little bit, but they really feel like, you'll see when we get into our list, where I'm like, I think we covered it pretty well.
Yeah, well, and especially between the interview that's coming up next, we really kind of picked from the different sections. So the first one that I'm going to go with is by the band Darkest Hour. The band, or the album, is called Deliver Us. So Darkest Hour, they put out a handful of albums on Victory. I think they already had a few out before this one. This one stands out to me because it came out when I was up in Yellowknife. So my wife went up to work there one summer, and when we finished tour, I flew up there and hung out there for a bit, and then we drove back to Regina, which was a 24-hour drive. And this is one of the albums that I had, and I mean, I love Darkest Hour. They're kind of in that melodic metalcore kind of genre. Lots of awesome riffs, really great drumming, awesome live band. There's a handful of their albums I could have picked, but this one kind of stuck out because of the memory I have with it, and just a really, really good melodic metal album.
That's interesting because my number five, I did listen to that. I put like you sent me your five, and I put them in a playlist and just kind of like played through and gave a listen to each one. I'm thinking that one, out of the five that you sent, was probably also my number five out of that. I was just like trying to remember back to it. But anyway, my number five that I picked, a lot of it has to do as well with kind of like memories that are tied to it. And it's the I guess self-titled debut from Straylight Run. They're an interesting band to me because of course they were not a byproduct so much, but like, and not a side project, but of Taking Back Sunday, because one of their members, I'm trying to remember, he was the second vocalist in the band. I'm just trying to remember his name right now. John Nolan. John Nolan was in Taking Back Sunday, and he was like the second vocalist on that first record. He's actually, I believe, back in Taking Back Sunday now, but he left at one point and started this band with his wife, and it was, parts of it were very much, you could tell he came from Taking Back Sunday and kind of like from that world, but it was also, maybe a little more piano and acoustic driven, definitely a different sound for a lot of what Victory was putting out. I think definitely a lot more mellow in a sense, but it's the kind of specific memory I have tied to is I bought it like a day or two before. I bought it right around when I got married, and I took it on like the CD. I took it on our honeymoon. We went to Puerto Vallarta, and like it was at a time where like maybe MP3 players were just becoming a thing, but they weren't like, obviously you didn't have a phone that you were carrying around streaming music and stuff. So I took a Discman with me on the airplane, and I bought like a headphone splitter so that my wife and I could both listen to music on the Discman. And then as we like sat on the beach and whatever, I was just like lugging this thing around. But I only brought that CD, and then what the heck was it called? In Between Dreams, I think, by Jack Johnson.
Okay.
Very telling of the time, because I think that one just came out too. But yeah, no, this one, when we sat down to take a look at Victory Records, I was like, oh, I forgot all about this, and put it back on. And yeah, it's just immediate like snapshot of kind of that period in time, because they were a band that most of the bands on my list, they were a band that I didn't really follow after that. Like it was like that one release, I was like, yep. And I sucked it up, loved it. And then after that, I think I can recall listening to their follow-up and just not really liking it a ton, but I could also be confusing them with another band at that point. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not sure what year this release came out, or if this was the first of its kind for Victory. But there was definitely a period where they were putting out albums like this, where they were clearly branching off, even more so from what they were kind of known for. I'm guessing because of the connection with Taking Back Sunday, which is often what happens with labels and releases.
Well, and part of me is wondering if that's why it was on Victory, like if John Nolan was in like part of his contract with Victory was had to put out so many records. I'm trying to see if it says anywhere. Here you go. Due to John's and Sean's involvement in their previous band, they were bound by contract to release an album under Victory Records. They began to record their first album in April 2004 and released their self-titled debut on October 12th, 2004, after a 1-month postponement. The album sold over 11,000 copies in the first week, made the Billboard Top 100 Albums list. The album featured Nate Ruess, former lead singer of The Format and current frontman of indie pop group Fun. What? Say what? Interesting. That's a little known fact.
There you go.
Yeah. On the song It's for the Best. In late 2005, the band toured with Simple Plan. So yeah, that record was on Victory because they were under contract. I'm just not sure. Oh yeah, and then their next one, Prepare to Be Wrong, an EP they released in 2005, was also on Victory, which then ended their contract with Victory. So after that, they were on Universal. Jeez. All right, cool. But yeah, so there you go. I was wondering that, but didn't look it up.
Seems like an interesting band to tour with.
Yeah.
Seems like an interesting band to tour with Simple Plan.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, what was Simple Plan doing at that time? Like, I'm trying to think if they were still kind of like the straight up pop punk, or if they had kind of, I don't know if they had started like doing their transition to more of the pop radio stuff. But anyway, what's your number 4?
Yeah. Number 4 is Atreyu with Death Grip on Yesterday, I believe is what it's called. Death Grip on Yesterday. Yeah, so Atreyu was one of those bands that, was kind of coming after the kind of boom of hardcore and metal, where they were kind of going a bit more mainstream, a bit more goth, screamo kind of stuff. So this was the third album that they put out. And yeah, this album is just great. It's really catchy. It's heavy and melodic. It's kind of one of those, if you like Atreyu, then you're really going to like this album. And this was kind of my last album of theirs that I really liked. I still remember going and buying it at the mall and listening to it on my Discman. And yeah, this is still one I go back to. It also, I don't know if it came with it or if it was a separate thing, but there was, a DVD, which was pretty common back then, that you'd get with magazines or whatever, that had, a 30-minute kind of studio behind the scenes kind of thing. Now you would just watch it on YouTube, but back then, you had to get it on the DVD. And so that really kind of instilled my love for it, just kind of seeing some of the behind the scenes and seeing the drums being recorded. And it's just a really, really good sounding album, and one that I love going back to.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I heard Atreyu first. I'm thinking I must have had like a Victory like compilation or DVD or something, because I definitely remember listening to them. I don't know that I was a little bit surprised when I was looking this one up that, yeah, because I think you said it was like their third release or whatever. And I was like, oh, I kind of expected, like the first one or whatever one that they kind of first really came onto the scene with. But yeah, they're always a band that immediately when I think of Atreyu, I think of Neverending Story, and like
Yeah.
one of like the saddest moments in any, like movie I watched growing up as a kid, right? Like when the horse dies, like it just rips my heart out every time. But yeah, no, it's funny because I think so far we're going in the same order with your like list when I listen through them. The ones that are a little more, kind of on the like the metal core side of things are the ones that were sort
Yeah.
of towards the bottom of our list. But that record sounds great, for sure. My number 4 is a band. I don't even know if I realized when I had this record that it was on Victory Records. I must have, but it's Refused, Songs to Fan the Flames of Discontent. Um, of course, Refused, everyone was big and huge on The Shape of Punk to Come and that record. And it was cool, but for me, like I think I bought this record because of The Shape of Punk to Come, even though I never owned The Shape of Punk to Come. I went, oh yeah, everyone's loving on Refused, and I saw this one in store, so I went and picked it up. And it's definitely a little, it's different from what would come out later, but it just, I think it hits so hard. And the song like Coup d'etat back in early January when all the shenanigans were going on down in the States in the Capitol and people are talking about a coup d'etat, all I could think of was the song Coup d'etat from this record, and how I can't remember the lead singer's name, but just I'll have my coup d'etat. It was just like boom, drilled in my head. It's something that stuck with me since I first heard it back in the early 2000s. But it's also got just like a striking cover. I don't know. I'm always a little bit surprised maybe when that band gets talked about and like that record just kind of gets ignored because,
Mm.
people, there was something special about The Shape of Punk to Come that I liked, but also I think I actually preferred this record because this record just feels more like the songs are just more in your face. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but were you ever a fan of Refused?
Uh, I feel like the most, or when I listened to them the most, is when I was with a few specific friends, and I can
Yeah.
picture still being in their car, especially that "Rather Be Dead" song. Certain
Yeah.
parts where when I hear it, it's like, oh, I just visualize myself driving with my buddy in his
Yeah.
car, and yeah, I mean, they were one of those bands, and especially with "Shape of Punk to Come," gained a lot more popularity, and
Yeah.
never an album that I would like go and put on start to finish. It was kind of, if they had music videos, or because a lot of their songs I find are like pretty dramatic, kind of like up and down, or
Yeah. Yeah. They're
a
a little
little bit
spazzy.
spazzy here and
Yeah.
there, and yeah, and so it's not the style I connected with the most, but I thought was really cool. And again, if I'm like driving around with my buddy in his car and it's on, he'll play me his favorite songs, and I'll kind of connect with it that way.
Yeah. Um, like speaking of Shape of Punk to Come, though, the song New Noise, like the lead guitar riff in that has been something that kind of stuck with me forever. And anytime someone's playing like
Yeah.
a lead riff that they're palm muting on, let's say the G, B, and E strings, I immediately, especially like the G and B, I'm in this world where I'm like, oh, I'm listening to Refused. It was something that was kind of pretty, I think, unique to that song. But so yeah, what's your number 3?
Oh man, this album is so good. It's by Close Your Eyes. The album is called Empty Hands and Heavy Hearts.
Yeah.
So this is a band that they put out their first album, and I remember there being like a little bit of hype around it. I never loved it. I would listen to it. It's like, it's kind of mediocre. It kind of sounds like a first band that Victory, saw potential in and signed them and put out their first album. But this one it sounded so much better. The songs were so much better. It was super catchy. This one reminds me a lot of Trash Boat, who we
Mm-hmm.
both love.
Yeah.
Just kind of that kind of melodic, fast, somewhat hardcore, but not that heavy. Kind of similar to like Comeback Kid and Rise Against at times. Where the vocals maybe kind of yelled a bit more. But I
Yeah.
don't know. This album is really good. I love putting it on. The songs are really memorable, and yeah, a great release.
Yeah, no, this is one that, because it's the very top of the playlist I made from the albums that you suggested. And I think I get parts of Darkest Hour maybe and this record confused a little bit because I'm trying to remember. I'm looking right now to see if no, I think it's the song Injustice on this record that when it first came on, like I put it back to the beginning again, and I was like, oh, this song is like, it bangs, and it kind of reminds me at times maybe of like of Alexis on Fire. I don't know if that's a fair comparison, but just like the because there's, I mean, there's yelling slash screaming as well as kind of like a clean vocal, and when the clean vocal's going, he actually sounds like a mix for me, anyways, between Dallas Green and Wade. Can't remember his last name, but Wade of Alexis on
McNeil.
Fire, Wade McNeil. Yeah, like this like crossover between those two vocals, because of course Dallas and Wade have such, you know, different vocals from each other, with, you know, Dallas being super clean and Wade being kind of growly, right? Like, and so it's like this in between that there's moments on this record that remind me of the good parts of Alexis on Fire that I really liked around that same time. But yeah, I definitely appreciated kind of more of the like the hardcore punk edge with this one, compared to say like the other Atreyu and Darkest Hour that were, you know, kind of leaning more in the direction of metal. But uh, I think it was one that you said I would like when you sent the list.
Yeah, because it reminds me of Trash Boat, which I know you like. So
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't hear that in it, so I'm interested to go back and listen again. But I do know too, when I was like listening, I don't know if I listened to any of these albums like start to finish complete, or if I would like listen to a handful of songs then like skip to the next one to see. But this was definitely one of the ones that stood out. But my number 3 is a Canadian band by the name of Grade. They're from Ontario, Under the Radar. And I mentioned earlier with when I was talking about Stray Light Run that there were some bands on this list that I didn't really follow up outside of one particular album, and this is definitely one of them. I tried listening to the album that came after this, and I've heard people say good things about it, but I could just never get into it for whatever reason. But this record, Under the Radar, I don't know if they had a music video for the song A Year in the Past, Forever in the Future. They must have, because I want to say I heard it on like Much Music sort of thing. They must have had a video for it that I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure it's just them playing in a room or whatever, right? But that like opening riff on that song, din, 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 like I've heard that riff everywhere, like not just by
yeah,
Grade, but it like pops up like in a Matt Good song. Speaking of another Canadian, he has, I can't remember specifically which song, but he has one that has like that exact same riff in it, and I feel like I've heard it come up in other places, and every time I hear it in these different songs, I'm immediately drawn back to Grade. And just like, it's one of that song particularly is like a song that when I look back on like high school, I'm like, oh, that song. Like it's one of those ones that'll immediately take me back there. And I actually only had one opportunity that I can remember to see them, and I had to skip out on it because, you know, they came to Calgary at a time when I was like, um, I had to bum rides to get into shows, like because I didn't have my driver's license, and Calgary was a good, you know, half hour away or whatever. So I always had to rely on friends or the odd time like my parents to like drop me off or something. And so they came to town and they played at like the Calgary Multicultural Center, like the venue that basically all the local all ages shows were at. But instead of it being on a Friday or a Saturday, it was like, because they were touring, it was like a Wednesday. And so I couldn't find a ride to go. And I just remember being so bummed. And part of me thinks there's a chance that Monine also played that show. Either that or a different show that happened at the multi during the week that I had to miss that Monine played at. But yeah, so I was always a little bit bummed. I think they're actually not necessarily still together, but back together. I think I saw a YouTube video of them from just a couple of years ago playing at like a Dickens pub somewhere in Ontario, like just a tiny show on the floor. That'd be like, yeah, I'd be down for that. But yeah, no, this record has always been, and I've seen them come up as like an influential band in like whether it's different like post-hardcore Facebook groups or whatever. And I'm always like a little bit surprised anytime like a Canadian band gets brought up. And I'm like, wow,
yeah.
really? Like, okay, cool. Like I had no idea. Like to me, they were just, you know, a good Canadian band that, you know, and that's part of, I think, kind of like the world or scenes that we sort of grew up in, is like sometimes you just assume that these bands don't do anything anywhere else, but here they were influencing people, I guess. So that's cool.
Yeah, they were always one of those bands that, you know, like you said, they were being, they were influencing other bands, and their name was coming up a lot. I never remember seeing them come through anywhere where I was.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they just kind of got lost in, some of the other bigger Ontario bands, like you said, Alexis on Fire or Silverstein, Cancer Bats. Like, it just seemed like those
Yeah.
bands, were always coming through, or you were seeing them on tours or in magazines. For some reason, Grade kind of seemed like those one of, I don't know if it was just like wrong place, wrong time, or whatever it was, or maybe they just didn't tour as full time or whatever, but they
Yeah.
just kind of weren't in front of people as much as other bands. And so,
Well, and part of me wonders if they stuck more to like the Northeast touring, like of the States and stuff like that. Like I could see that like being a thing where just, playing like Philly and New Jersey and like New York, like just like kind of that sort of area
yeah,
versus trekking across the country. Like, and maybe that's how they ended up influencing, a number of bands or whatever, like, because they were in some of those bigger scenes versus coming out West, I guess. I don't know. But regardless, that record is one that even outside of doing this episode that I'll go back to, like for sure number 5 and 4, like Straight Light Run and Refuse, for me, like I don't really go back to them outside of doing something like this, but Grade is one that'll come up, and like I said, specifically A Year in the Past, Forever in the Future, just to hear that dan, 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 this is a
yeah.
time in our life. It's such a good song, so I won't ruin it anymore by singing it. But what's your number 2?
Number 2, I'm going to go with Comeback Kid
Ooh,
Broadcasting.
yeah.
And I
We're
know
sticking
people might,
Canadian. Got that CanCon going.
yeah. Well, yeah, and I could just hear people saying, like, oh, how could you not pick Wake the Dead?
Hmm.
That is an amazing record. I do love that one. This one I picked because it kind of stands out to me for a few reasons. So this is the first album that Andrew was singing. So Scott left after the first 2 albums, and this is kind of one that just I remember kind of people talking about, and not really sure if they were liking it, and it was almost a little bit underrated. It kind of blew up with Wake the Dead, and then this album came out, and it had a little bit different of a sound, not that drastic that you put it on and it still sounds like Comeback Kid, but I know every time I go back to this one, I'm kind of surprised by how much I like it. And maybe that's just because it didn't get nearly as many plays as Wake the Dead. But it's one that when I put on, it's like, man, there's some really cool parts in here, and I wish more people would go back and appreciate it. And this album's come up a number of times. Even Stu Ross, who now plays guitar in the band, had mentioned this album on our quarantine scene
Hmm.
episode about kind of an underrated album. And so yeah, this is one I think people should go back to. Comeback Kid's one of those bands. If you like that kind of music, you know who they are. You have their favorite albums by them, and besides a select few people, I haven't heard that this is a favorite of people's. But I don't really know why, because when I go back and listen, I'm like, this still sounds like Comeback Kid. There's a lot of really good stuff happening here, but just again that kind of transition period maybe threw off some people.
It's interesting because so when you sent me your list, I was like, at first I was like, oh, there's only one album on here I'm familiar with, and then which is your number 1 album now I know, but when I went and looked at Broadcasting, I was like, oh no, I've listened to this for sure, not a ton. Like Comeback Kid was always a band that I didn't even realize they were on Victory Records, for one thing. Like that was kind of a bit of a surprise to me when I saw that. I was like, oh, all right, cool. Like, but I'm trying to remember if it was them or Figure 4, because I always get those 2 bands mixed up, because I think Figure 4 was the first band and then Comeback Kid kind of started. Is that right?
Yeah, Figure 4 was going, and then Comeback Kid was kind of a side project.
Yeah. But I saw one of them and if it's Figure 4, then it's completely, doesn't matter, but in like this tiny, tiny room with the band One of These Days, which was like a big,
Oh yeah, they were awesome.
yeah. And so that was mainly why I went to that show, actually, was to see One of These Days. And then another band that played that show was a band called The Stars Wept, I think. Either that or or the Stars Wept were an actual band that I'm confusing them with. But anyways, it was like featuring a couple members of Compromise, and it was a pretty cool show. But it was like in this tiny room that was normally, like I mentioned, the multicultural center earlier, and normally this room was like used as like the coat room. And then so they
Oh
did
yeah.
this one show, and it was like, I mean, it was bigger than you needed for a coat room for a lot of these shows, but like this one show, it was the room that we were in, and it was just like the whole room was a pit basically, right? Like you couldn't, the only way you're getting out of it is if you were like plastered against the wall. But it was one of those memorable shows that kind of came with me that I still, but obviously the biggest detail I don't remember is if it was Comeback Kid or Figure Four. I feel like it may have been Comeback Kid because at the time Figure Four was like the bigger of the two bands, and I feel like it was, like they would have been playing the bigger room maybe, but I could be entirely wrong on that. But anyway, my number two. Now this could have been a toss up with my number one, but in the end, I went with this one at number two because my number one band is one that, like, my number one album is from a band that I got more into, even like as they kind of went on. But so my number two is Thursday, Full Collapse, and this band or this album, I had their album before it, like Waiting, and it was good, but this album, just like I want to say it's also one of the albums that like blew the doors off of like the whole post-hardcore scene where, you had bands that were like, oh, you can sing and scream. Like
Yeah.
I felt like before this it was more, you either had bands that screamed or you had bands that sang. Now obviously I'm not saying Thursday is the first band to do it, but I think they were kind of like the first band to really be at the forefront of that. And when this album came out, I also felt like all of a sudden, at least in my scene that I grew up in, you started seeing bands, my band included, that started including songs that had screaming and singing in it. Like they actually, for me anyways, they kind of changed how I viewed what, a song, a punk song or whatever a hardcore song could be. And it was all, yeah, like I can remember playing a show. So the song Cross Out the Eyes was like just like a huge influence on me. And I can remember I was like trying out for this band that was in the scene that they were like, I can't remember what they're called now, but they're like, oh, we're going to change our sound. They were like this kind of like straight up like pop punk sort of band, doing their thing. And they're like, we want to like change our sound and do more, like sing, scream sort of stuff because of Thursday. And so they're like, hey, did you want to come try? So I played like one show with them, or I just did one song. The rest of their set was still kind of like their older material. And then we did this one song together. And I just remember like going all out. Like this is when I'm just like learning how to scream. And, like it was a fun time because like it was probably one of like the most like reactive crowds I was ever in front of. But it literally is just like this one song. And I'm like, all right, peace. I didn't even stay for the rest of the show. I was there, did one song, was like, hey, I'm out. But yeah, no, Thursday,
That's awesome.
they like, because then I just feel like there was a flood of bands that came after that were all of a sudden doing the whole
Yeah.
singing and screaming thing. And for better or for worse, like this record, I can still put it on. And it's funny because like straight up vocally, like Jeff's singing voice isn't necessarily my favorite vocalist by any means. But as soon as like the screams and the layered vocals come in, it's like, oh, it all makes sense now. It's all right in the world again. But yeah, so what was were you ever were you into Thursday at all, or were they kind of like one of those bands you're like, all right?
They're one of those bands that a lot of people around me really loved, but I never super got into. Like, I've mentioned this before, how, bands like this, or even, bands like The Used, where, it's not quite heavy
Yeah.
enough for me. There's maybe a bit too much kind of up and down dynamics, which at the time, I just wanted it to be just straight ahead, fast, heavy, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But I mean, this album got played a lot, in my friends' vehicles or in our tour van or whatever it was. And, it was pretty much impossible to not listen to this album. Like it was getting played everywhere. They were blowing up, Same with bands like The Used and Taking Back Sunday and My Chemical Romance. Like those kind of bands were impossible to not listen to, you know, like even if
Mhm.
you were at the mall and stuff, that these bands are getting played. And so, you know,
Yeah.
I definitely can what's the word, like appreciate the influence they had on the scene and just kind of what they brought. And what I always liked about them is you know, you mentioned Jeff, their singer, but just a band as a whole, you know, they don't stand out as, you know, like a My Chemical Romance or The Used, where, you know, they were kind of like the pretty boys. Not that they were like trying to be, you know, they were kind of dressed gothic and whatever, but
Yeah.
I never really saw Thursday as one of those bands that, you know,
So
like teenage girls loved because of
yeah.
how they looked.
Yeah, it's interesting with Thursday because I think I read that they're kind of like viewed as one of the last like actual sort of like DIY coming from the hardcore scene, post-hardcore bands before really like the whole mall emo scene blew up. So you talk about bands like The Used and My Chemical Romance and then like further down the line like Fall Out Boy, stuff like that. Like that Thursday was kind of I think they're it's safe to say they're a part of that in the sense that like for sure they played with some of those bands, but from what I understand they also still came from like the basement show scene sort of thing, right? Like where like
Yeah.
that's what they came up through. And so I know I'm pretty sure they were also a bunch of art students, which is always a you know a good formula for a band that wants to change a sound, change a genre a little bit, just send them to art school. um, but but yeah, so I've just read some things where they were kind of like one of the last ones that were you know like legit tied to a scene. Whether or not that's true I don't know, right? Like because I mean Dashboard Confessional would come right around that time and sort of after that. And you can look at Dashboard and be like, well, you know, like that's like the forefront of mall emo even at times. And he legit came
Right.
from a hardcore scene, right? Like, so some of that was still there for sure. But I think they were just starting to enter a world where it was more and more like now bands are coming up and they're not necessarily coming through that sort of avenue or whatever. But let's get into your number one.
Yeah, so my number one is maybe kind of a typical one, I guess, depending on how you view it. But that's A Day to Remember is Homesick. Um, and I kind of struggled with this one. You know, it's like, well, you know, I like Comeback Kid more overall than A Day to Remember. But again, this album was very influential. You know, it was kind of everywhere. Um, it blended, you know, pop punk and heavy, which I loved. And by this album, people had really kind of gotten used to the sound. I remember when their first album, For All Those That Have Heart, came out. You know, it was kind of like this, like, what is going on? Like, it's pop punk, but all of a sudden there's breakdowns. You know,
Hmm.
they were kind of starting to blur those lines. And but when this album came out, it was a lot more kind of refined, you know, so to speak. It wasn't as kind of jagged as the first one. And just an album, yeah, I go to all the time. I just put it on a few weeks ago. Just a lot of really fun, memorable songs on it. Really cool, heavy parts. Really good melody in it. And yeah, it's maybe not even necessarily their best album, but I think it's, at least for me, probably their most memorable. If I could only have one album from them, this is probably the one that I would stick with.
This is another album or band on this list that I didn't realize was actually on Victory Records. But part of that is because I didn't really like I want to say I probably listened to this record when around the time it came out because I had a friend who I remember him bringing it to me and be like, you got to check this out. Like, this is awesome. It may have been 1 or 2 years after it came out, but, and I remember listening to it and be like, oh, this is kind of cool. Cause you know, like you mentioned the whole pop punk side with, you know, the heavier side. And, you know, I had no idea at that time what easy core was by any means. And so I remember listening to it, the artwork kind of stuck with me. And then that was sort of it. Like he lent it to me for a little while and then, you know, I gave it back and that was sort of it. And then we did our easy core episodes last year. And before that, like in, you know, another age of this podcast, we talked about this record and it's grown on me over time. I still have one major bone with this record. And it's the gang vocals on it are just so, uh, I don't know how obnoxious, I think is the word I've used to describe them. Like they literally feel in the mix to me like they recorded the whole album and they mixed it And then as they were sending it off for mastering, someone was like, what if we put gang vocals in? Or they're like, we forgot to put gang vocals in. So then it feels to me like they recorded them separately and then like just loaded them in the tracks. They're so weird for me, but at the same point, like, you kind of get past it. After, it's just, I just remember when I first heard it, I was like, oh, like those gang vocals are right there, right? Like, as opposed to being like a backup sort of thing, they're like front and center at times. But it is like for sure a memorable record. And I was a little surprised to find out that it was your number one. Like, I thought Comeback Kid for sure was going to be your number one, but I mean, I thought this would be number two, so it's fine. Like, you can throw those back and forth. But yeah, no, it's a good time. My number one, you kind of briefly mentioned them, would be Taking Back Sunday, Tell All Your Friends. And so when I was like going through my list and trying to figure out what my number one was, I was going back and forth between Thursday's Full Collapse and this record. And then I kind of decided, because I started even going back and forth between this record and Where You Want to Be by Taking Back Sunday, because I also really like that record. And so in the end, I was like, well, I think it's Taking Back Sunday has to be my number one, because unlike Thursday, I followed this band, for the next few albums, and then kind of fell off, and then sort of came back with their last album. And I saw them, on the tour for that record with The Used, actually, which was just like an incredible show. And I was so surprised that after all this time, like, I thought the bands were actually better than when I'd seen them back kind of at their peak, which doesn't always happen. As far as their performances were concerned, I'm not saying like their latest records were anywhere near, these first couple, but yeah, so I ended up going with this record just because I can remember, like, when it came out, just being blown away at what they were doing, not necessarily musically, but vocally. Much like Thursday, there was like nothing like this, like going on, as far as, I had heard at that time. Maybe you could maybe make a comparison with, say, like when Blink would have Mark and Tom kind of do a little bit of a back and forth, but like the way they did this, and then you like open the lyric book and the lyrics don't make sense because they're not really in any order, because how do you present what they're singing, right? Like, it's just like this whole like mess. But at the same point, I was listening to it on my way home from work today, and I was like, dang, I could sing along to almost like every word on this record still. Like, it's, as soon as it comes on, I'm like, heartbroken all over again in the best of ways, right? Like, and it's interesting because there's like, so this record and the first record from, I can't remember the name of it, but Brand New, the first
Deja?
No, that's their second one. Hold on, I want to, but there, I have it. Oh, it's literally behind me. Shit, it's right here. Oh, Your Favorite Weapon. I was like, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's Deja. But so there are songs on these two records that share lyrics, which is like this crazy thing. Like, when you hear it, there was this whole thing at the time where it was like, you're either team Taking Back Sunday or team Brand New, because what happened is, like, the lead singer of Brand New, so Jesse Lacey, and the lead singer of Taking Back Sunday, which Adam
Lazara,
yeah, something like that. Trying to find it. I was hoping it would pop up, but I guess there was like a thing where Adam maybe stole Jesse's girlfriend, or there's some weird love triangle thing, right?
He stole Jesse's girl.
Yeah, exactly. And so there was this whole like back and forth thing that they had, and a big beef. And so there were like lyrics. I don't remember. I know it's out there, but either someone stole lyrics from someone, like vice versa, whatever the case. It's this whole just like interesting mess of a thing. And it's funny because, yeah, you had people that were like, oh, you got to be team Jesse or team Adam, basically, right? And I like both bands. They're fine, but I think Taking Back Sunday is definitely my favorite of the two. But yeah, so it was just like something I'd never heard before, and their follow-up, Where You Want to Be, I thought was just as good, even though they had a member change. And Louder Now is good too. It's kind of one that's grown on me some. It was like forever I was like, well, no, it's either Tell All Your Friends or Where You Want to Be. Like, Louder Now is fine, but it's not as and maybe part of it was because I believe it was produced by the same guy who produced, what was like, it was one of the Good Charlotte records, like Young and Restless or Young and Hopeless or whatever, baby. And they just sounded so similar. Like if you listen to them, the kick drum on both of them sounds the exact same, and it drove me nuts. It's a weird thing to get, offended over. But and then like with Taking Back Sunday, the first time I saw them live was at Warped Tour, and they were like they were the last band of the day. And as was often the case with Calgary Warped Tours, there's bad weather that rolled in or was rolling in. So in this particular year, the bad weather was rolling in. It had been nice and hot all day. And then all of a sudden, it was just like this storm's rolling in. So they said, okay, Yellow Card and Taking Back Sunday are going to split one set. So instead of each getting 30 minutes, they're each going to get 15 minutes. And it's just going to be like bang, bang, so quick, right? And so they came out, Yellow Card played their set. I'm sure they played, a couple other hits, whatever. And then Taking Back Sunday came out, and they're like, do you want us to play? Because they were touring for Tell All Your Friends. And they're like, do you want us to play some new songs or some old songs? And of course, everyone's like, old songs. They're like, all right. So they just went into this set of like probably like 5 songs, just like bang, 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 bang. But as soon as they started playing, it just started pouring. And like, so Adam is like standing out on the front of the stage, just getting drenched, like downpour, just super like crazy. He's doing hair flips and his water's going everywhere, right? Like it's just like about as like emo anthemic as could possibly be. And then as soon as that finishes, everyone's like, okay, get the hell out of here. And so we're like all running back to our cars. It's just like coming down. I get in my car. I'm in there. My buddy's in there, and we're waiting for one other guy who's catching a ride home with me. And he's just like taking his time, walking super slow, and it's like starts hailing like golf ball size hail, and he's just like like covering his head with whatever he can find. Like, you should probably run, because like Taking Back Sunday comes out on stage and they're like, we got a tornado brewing. It's like you just like look behind him and it's like green skies and just like pure mayhem and hell behind them. But it was a pretty great set, even though it was only 15 minutes. I was like, dude, that was awesome. I don't care if it was cut short. Every bit of that was absolute, just like insanity. It was too good. So thankfully I did get to see them several times after that, like actual full concerts without, getting drenched. But hey, that's it. Were you into Taking Back Sunday at all?
Yeah. Wow. I can't match that story. That sounds pretty awesome.
The word is epic that you're looking for.
Yeah, I definitely didn't get into Tell All Your Friends. Again, it was around. I heard it. People were listening to it, loving it. I did enjoy Where You Want to Be and Louder Now, and then kind of checked out a little bit kind of here and there after that. Yeah, again, one of those bands that, I didn't get super connected with, or their music, lyrics didn't really connect with me, but I really enjoy listening to it. I like it more than Thursday, right? It's a bit more melodic, a bit more easy to sing along to and catchy. And I don't know if I've ever seen them live. I was trying to think as you were telling that story if I've seen them, but it's not coming to me. So maybe I haven't. But
yeah, one of the shows I saw them was Taking Back Sunday with Under Oath and Armor for Sleep, which was the first proper time I got to see them. I think by that point they were on the Louder Now tour, because it was in like it was an arena show. Not like full like NHL, NBA arena, but it was still probably like 7,000 people in there or whatever. But it was pretty cool. But yeah, so you said you got into them with Where You Want to Be and then Louder Now. So Fred Mascherino, I don't know how to say his name, but he was the guy who came in the band. I actually just discovered he's got a YouTube channel that is pretty fascinating, because it's under his like other band name that he started after, The Color Fred, which is a terrible name, but I think it must have been the first record that he did like after he left Taking Back Sunday, and it much like Straylight Run with John Nolan, this record, there are definitely songs where you're like, oh yeah, it sounds like Taking Back Sunday. But he does some pretty fascinating videos where he'll like whether he's doing playthroughs of some of his songs, including like Taking Back Sunday songs, and he kind of breaks down things and does like vocals, like sing-alongs and stuff, or if he's like giving in-depth looks at some of these albums, it's pretty sweet. So if you're a fan of Taking Back Sunday, especially that era, and you haven't checked out Fred's YouTube channel, just look up The Color Fred. That's what it's under. And he calls it, I think it's called either, I think it's In the Shed with Fred or Fred in the Shed or something like that. Because I think he's got like a basically a shed on his property that he's decked out to be like a studio. That looks pretty sweet. But anyway, yeah. So those are our top 5 Victory Records releases. And I think we got a pretty good list. We covered like a good variety of what Victory was doing, at least like from the late 90s all the way through like the right around 2010 or so, right? So because when did A Day to Remember come out?
Yeah,
no, that would have been before 2010, I think. Maybe. Yeah, 2000.
Yeah, that was early, like 2005, 6 kind of thing, or
like when Homecoming came
out.
out.
Without giving any spoilers, we get into some. Sorry.
No, sorry, I was just trying to figure out when the Day to Remember record came out. But yeah, what were you saying?
Like 2007 or 8 maybe.
Yeah, that's what I said. I was trying to think of when it was played to me, which house I was living in at the time. I was in college, so that's a window from 2007 to 2009. But I don't know when it came out. But yeah. So anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
So that'll we're gonna keep diving into labels. You got another episode coming up on Victory Records, like you mentioned. We're gonna be following these episodes up with interviews. At least that's the plan, with artists who are on the label. So that's kind of what you're going to hear in the next episode. But we are going to dive into some other record labels, some of your favorites. If you've got a label that you want us to cover that you think we might not cover, let us know. Like, who knows? Maybe we'll be like, oh yeah, I was a fan of Lobster Records. I didn't really know much on Lobster Records. There's the odd thing, but
they had some really cool releases. Yeah,
I don't know that I could do a legit top 5, but except I might be able to go like, oh, there's literally 5 records on this label I've listened to. So that's cool. But yeah, you know what I'm saying? So let us know wherever you're listening to the podcast. It'd be awesome if you rated it and reviewed it, because that's going to help the show grow and get into more people's ears. Or another way you can do that is just by telling your friends about the show.
Tell all your friends.
Yeah, tell all your friends. That was like a... Anyway, you can find us on our social media at Growing Punk Pod, Twitter, Instagram. We're on Facebook as well. Just look us up. And then, of course, our website, growingpunkpod.com. But that will do it. So goodbye, friends.
See you later.
Later,
skaters.
Vortex, please. You're letting the sadness of the swamps get to you. You have to try. You have to care.